Hello and welcome back to Inspected Goals, the podcast where we try to improve our play through a more analytical approach. How are you doing, Luke? Good to see you again.
I'm very good, man. I'm rushed off my feet, as you know. Literally like 3 days of checking around schools for my oldest daughter to go to, which has been joyous to sit there in the hall and listen to the teachers big up their school.
Yeah,
And you called me very old for having to do that, so thanks for that.
that's right, no
But
problem.
yeah, so real life's been getting in the way quite a lot recently. Been rushed off my feet, so haven't had much time to think FPL wise, which isn't ideal when you popped your wild card like me. So hopefully this chat will help steer me in the right direction.
Yeah,
We'll see.
I probably only called you old because I'm insecure because I'm turning 30 next year and having a crisis.
Oh right, yeah, it is definitely all downhill from 30, mate. I'm telling you now.
But get past my, entering my prime. Yeah, if I was a Premier League centre forward, which I'm not.
I think that's debatable these days.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Yeah. How was your last game week? I don't think we've done a pod together, have we, for quite a few weeks?
We have not. My last game week was shit, just like every other one for about 4 weeks. They've been so bad. Like everything's just been bad. But I haven't really been keeping up to what like everyone else's score is in the drama. So I don't. I mean, maybe that sounds insensitive of me compared to some people. I know other people had bad weeks as well. But around 5 million, I think 48 points. I'm just looking now. I don't know if that's good or not compared to most people. Like I say, I've been involved, but it didn't feel good. Put it that way.
Was it a red arrow?
It was absolutely a red arrow. Yeah. I think about 600,000 places or something. It's not ideal at this time of the season. Estupinan coming off the bench was probably the kicker that really hurt. And that's part of the reason why it forced me to wildcard, actually, is just the fact that it was Botman that missed out. And obviously just signing Botman, who was key to holding my plans together. Because I was always on a wildcard 10 strategy. And now I just look at my team and there was too many holes to deal with in 2 weeks. So I decided to go early. But yeah, it was not great. How was yours?
Mine was good, actually. Yeah, it was.
Of course it was, yeah.
Yeah,
I remember now.
Just a Watkins, basically.
Yeah.
But, I was saying, yeah, it was ridiculous. I basically had Watkins at the beginning, and then I had Trippier and Saka like most of the people, and then everything else was rubbish. But yeah, just Watkins is enough for a really good game week. I got 60 in the end. So it wasn't anything like absolutely outrageous, but yeah, very good because of Watkins. And it was like one of that 12:30 game. It was kind of the... Do you know when people tweet and they joke and say, "Oh, all I need is so-and-so player to score 3 goals and get 2 assists, and then my game week's
yeah."
And then this player I've got high ownership to score, who I don't own, to score an own goal, then my game will be fine. That's exactly what happened. It was like he'd already scored a brace, and then suddenly a Stupinan scored an own goal who I don't own. I couldn't believe it, and then it just kept coming. But yeah, great. That's why we played the game, I guess.
That is definitely why we play the game. Those moments, like I used to get those moments every now and then. It feels like it doesn't feel like I've had them for a long time, but they are pretty much exactly why we play the game. Those huge hauls from those players is so cool
and satisfying as well, because like I'd had him since the first game week and held him the whole time.
It's just a great pick.
He's done really well. He's just started well. He kept getting 5 points, and then he just got gradually better in terms of just points.
I'm in like a group chat on WhatsApp, and I mean, I'm sure some of them might be in the chat or watch this back, and they'll vouch for me. Literally every week, I'm trying to bat off people saying they're going to sell Watkins for different people, and I told them to keep him the entire time, and then obviously just done really well, and then he came through. It's great, but then I sold Watkins for Alvarez in like game week 3, so it's the usual thing of like what I say seems to go pretty well, but what I actually do doesn't particularly work out. Although Alvarez, I don't know, maybe for instance game week 3, they're probably quite close, to be fair.
I was going to say you probably not actually missed out on that many points there.
No.
But yeah, I think it's satisfying not just because of the points, but actually he's one of the players that, because I've held him, is probably allowing me to hold my wild card. To be honest, I mean, I basically had 2 options this week. It was either make a transfer and roll the other to try and hold my wild card as long as possible, or just go all in. I would have bought Morris and Kaminsky. Whether I'd have captain Morris or not, I don't know. I think I probably would have, but I'm not sure. I don't know, to be honest. And that would have been really good. But it was just that was committing to wildcard this week, and I didn't want to do that. So I would have had a monster score if I did that, but I'm pretty happy with where my team is at in terms of being able to hold the wild card now.
I think we're like. Did you say, are we level on points, or have I gone down since the Estupinan subbing? Probably.
I think we were level on points, maybe before Luton played, or even before the Chelsea game, but there weren't many points in those games, so we're similar, I think. Yeah. But my rank's about 500k. somewhere, which feels like pretty good, to be honest, considering where most people are. I think it's a pretty decent start. But it's just so close. It's just kind of one game week, but like an awful game week, and I'll be 2 million. So it's just doesn't.
I'm not overly fussed about rank, like especially this early on as well. But I think it feels even worse because the last 2 seasons, I think for me particularly, and I think in general, really amongst the community, everyone's been in and around like sort of the top 100k, almost the top 20k quite a lot of the time from the beginning, which is just a fantastic start. And you just kind of get used to it, don't you, and accustomed to it and think it's going to happen again. But there are absolutely no guarantees in this game, and that's what people need to learn. Like, it's mad. You can look at any. I mean, how many game weeks are we? 7 weeks in? 8 weeks in? If you were to pick, I think again, I always say this kind of stuff, but if you were to pick 7 game weeks at random out of the season, forget that they've happened in a row. It doesn't matter, and then say I'll compete against someone who doesn't really know against much about FPL. You don't really have, it's not as good a chance as you might think of actually just being ahead of them. Like, there's so much randomness in those 7 weeks. Anyone at work who doesn't even know about football and picked them at random. Like, literally, my missus is beating me and she's not looked at a team for 5 weeks. Like, it happens. Welcome to FPL. Welcome to football. It's just a realization for everyone, I think.
Yeah. No, it is. Yeah, there doesn't have to be a reason for everything. Just stuff happens. Like, for example, even within one game. So, well, take the Brighton Villa game. The stupid man had a 1-on-1 with the keeper, missed it. If he scores that, I'm screwed. There's a high ownership defender that scored against me. Watkins probably goes on to blank. I think it's like doing a podcast about trying to pick the best numbers for the lottery sometimes.
Yeah, like, I mean, the variance levels
in game weeks like this, anyway.
The variance has just got all different levels to it, hasn't it? It basically, refereeing variance, it just seems to be absolutely mental as well. It's like, in terms of penalties, or quite often, whether you get one or whether you don't.
Yep.
Like, even that's been a huge luck factor. I think you can. I mean, today they've come out, haven't they, saying that they got a couple of decisions wrong that would have benefited most people. I think I've got Mbomu, stuff like that. Stupinan's own goal shouldn't have been given or something. I've got him. Like, I mean, we could, to replay the game week, like Klopp was saying. But it's nothing you can do about it. You can't beat yourself up. It's just one of those things. Hopefully, as they always say, it will level out eventually. I'm skeptical. Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah, and so you're wildcarding now. This game week, you were trying to hold it till 10. I guess for a bit of like context, my plan at the moment is to hold my wild card until 19, but I'll play it sooner if I need to. That's the plan anyway. So me and Luke are in different positions. And we thought with this episode we would go through. We just basically put out a tweet asking for questions, and loads of them were really good and kind of covered what we were likely to discuss anyway. So we thought we'd actually just go through the questions first. So yeah, as we do that, pop questions in the chat as well. And we'll get straight on to the first question, which is the thing that a lot of people are wanting to discuss at the moment, which is from FPL_Burnley. Is Luke contemplating no Haaland? A lot of souls on review are recommending it for my team. And that's, because you're wildcarding.
Yeah, I think everyone...
Early thoughts?
I think the vast majority of people in analytical circles are. I think I'm right in saying that, at least the chat I've seen. And it's not necessarily even on wildcard. I think they're actually looking to move there just with free transfers, potentially, to get Salah. Mm-hmm. The strategy that I had in mind for 10 had Haaland, and I wasn't really going to back down from that. I had thought about maybe not going without him. But when I popped the wildcard early and I'm looking at 8, for some reason, it just feels easier to go without Haaland. I suppose it's probably also the fact that they just play Arsenal straight away, which... shouldn't be the reason, because it's just one game and obviously Haaland can score against Arsenal. But it was all the other sort of edge pieces as well, just seemed to work better and have a better squad overall. And I'm sure loads of other content has covered this, and loads of the analytical chat know it. It's not about Haaland necessarily. It's about a combination of players and how much EV you're squeezing out of it. And just not having Haaland and captaining other players, considering his huge price of 14 million, does look like it's probably the best way to go. Will it end up being the best way? Nobody knows, as we've already discussed. We don't know yet. I'm not one of these people who thinks that, and I'm sure no one does, that Haaland can't do well in this period. I think he can do fine in those games, and especially some of them are very, very scary, like home to Bournemouth, particular home to Brighton. Those are games where if he plays and gets big minutes, he's going to be heavily captained. I'm not really bothered about EO, but the reality is if he does really well in those weeks, it's going to hurt. But it's about how many points total he gets over that large period in combination then against your captain. On that individual week, if Haaland gets a hat-trick and Salah gets an assist, or whoever I might captain, yeah, it might hurt. But over between the 7 weeks gap between me and whoever that person is, I might do better. So that's the way I look at it. And it's also, there is an element of just trying to make it a little bit fun. I know we're not supposed to be doing that really on this podcast, but I've played this game for a long time, and yeah, people say points are fun, and I totally get that, they are. But also just having Haaland in your team perma for the whole season and having captain all the time doesn't particularly make it that fun for me. So where there is a chance where the math says, well, actually, this is a good opportunity to do it, I'll probably look to take it. I'm not completely sold, but the reason for that actually is because there's just more news coming in all the time, right? Lots of players are now dropping down with injury that made it more viable. And yeah, now that's not necessarily the case. I mean, I have a draft with Haaland in that I did before, and I really like it. So I still may go with it.
I presume for you, Luke, it's Salah and Haaland, or just Salah rather than just Haaland. Yeah.
No, yeah, Salah's in there. I mean, it's just too many good games for him and too many times where I would look to captain him. So again, I'm happy to pay that price for that reason. So I haven't fully settled in either way, but at the moment I'm on no Haaland, probably like 70-30, I would say, as far as that. So that's probably what I will end up doing. Are you I know you're obviously not on wildcard, but are you looking to move there as well? I know you've been very much an advocate of no Haaland during the coming up soon.
It's very easy to be when you're not wildcarding though. Just to peer pressure other people.
Yeah. Is that your tactic?
Yeah, and then I don't sell them. No, my plan is in game week 9 to do Sterling to Salah and Haaland to Alvarez or to Nunes or to Solanke or something. I might have to delay that by a week now, that move, because I'm having to make an extra transfer this week, so it would be for a hit. So I think it's most likely that I do it in game week 10. But yeah, I'll definitely, if I was wildcarding, I'd definitely sell him, and I'm pretty certain I'll do it in 10, but maybe even in 9. And it's just, I was just looking at the EV here on review over the next 12 game weeks. If you just look at just raw EV, Salah's 6.5 ahead of him, so like half a point or EV per game week, which is like pretty, like that's quite significant. It might not sound like a lot, but particularly when you bring captaincy into it as well, and the fact that Haaland's probably the best captaincy option in 2, maybe 3 of these next 8 game weeks. That's a huge part of it as well. That maybe some people are overlooking who just wouldn't consider it at all. But I think the key thing for people is that like don't be closed-minded to it. And it's the same with like the analytics lot, where now there's a massive amount of momentum on going without Haaland. Like you should have the same attitude as you in terms of being willing to change your mind if circumstances change and more affordable players become more viable. I think that's the key thing. But yeah, ultimately it's just his price and those fixtures, and the thing I talked about this with Sertalp on the podcast last week, is very much a unique circumstance. Like he's got 7 or 8 really bad fixtures in a row, or and a player like him can have bad fixtures. 7 or 8 of the worst fixtures in a row, and it happens to coincide with Salah having really good fixtures at exactly the same time. So I just think, and in a season where suddenly a lot of prices are very low, so it's a unique circumstances. I don't think it'll happen again this season, unless we get to double game weeks, basically. Just because of the way the fixtures have fallen, because I wouldn't normally consider it.
The price has caused it. The 14 million. If it was 12 million,
pricing.
Exactly. It makes that decision. But I will say the EV is still close enough for me, even if it was 6. Just if you are that kind of person, and I know it's not raw maths or anything, that mentally cannot deal with the fact that Haaland's not in your team, and there could be weeks where you are, gonna be regret it because he's an absolute machine and Saka, then just don't do it to yourself. It's fine. I don't think there's that much of a, if it was clearly obvious you should go this way, you should not. I don't think it is as clear as that. I do think those fixtures are tough for Haaland, but when I look at them and the actual teams, I know, again, we probably shouldn't go this way, but a lot of those teams aren't playing particularly well either. Will they continue to do so? Like, I feel like he could do absolutely fine. Like, I don't think his output, say, from now to from the beginning of the season till now, will necessarily dip in those fixtures. But you could argue even at 14 million for what he's performed in those first fixtures isn't necessarily worth that price as well. We're just kind of conditioned to it. And I've been around in this game long enough to know that there are other players that I've picked in the past that were 14 million, and some of them have worked out pretty well and been good, and some of them have just not worked out well. I don't think Haaland is one of those, but it is possible, is what I'm getting at. There are times when a player who has looked unreal and looked like everyone must have him in a team, like Van Persie was one for Man United. And yeah, there's other factors, age, and David Moyes turned up and other things, but it didn't work out. No one saw that at the very beginning necessarily. So it can happen for a small period where you can get away with it, basically. So that's what I'm willing to chance, I guess.
Yeah, sure. And in terms of like accommodating him, or sorry, being willing to get rid of him. If I just go to the next question. So this question's from Jack, FPL_Jack. A lot of talk about no Haaland wildcards, but the key to justifying Haaland in solves appears to be Morgan Gibbs-White. So if you have to get him in as well as Salah, he's often the players you go for. Is Haaland worth the price of picking and starting Morgan Gibbs-White for the foreseeable? Is Morgan Gibbs-White a robot pick? The first thing I'd say on that is it's more than just sacrificing one player. Like in my opinion, one of the key things of just having Salah rather than both is you end up probably using a lot of transfers around those mid-price midfielders to target the other fixtures. Players like Maddison, Saka, for example, Fernandes, Rashford, to get the right players at the right time. Whereas I think if you commit to just having Salah, it becomes easier just to have 4 other quality midfielders. So I think it also saves a lot of transfers, allows you to use those elsewhere. And there's other potential positions you're sacrificing as well if you have Haaland and Salah particularly. Yeah, potentially Watkins, potentially Trippier. Depends on your team. But yeah, any thoughts specifically on Morgan Gibbs-White?
I'm not the biggest fan of him. I think he's a decent player, but I don't really like him that much as a pick. But I completely understand it. The price is there. The fixtures are fine. Set pieces, penalties, usually nailed for 90. I know he missed last week. I think that was a bit of a surprise, but I can't see that happening. Well, very often again. So it's fine. Like I don't mind it. Like I don't gravitate towards him, but like I say, I think it's a fine pick if it enables you to get Haaland and you're happy with it. I mean, I did make a team. My wildcard team that I had in mind for game week 10, going off on a bit of a tangent, didn't have Morgan Gibbs-White in, and it has got Haaland, Watkins. It basically just gets rid of Trippier instead. I think that's easier at 10 because Newcastle's fixtures aren't as good. Like I do find it quite funny at the moment that Trippier was like always a casuals pick. He's awful. 6.5 million is ridiculous. No one's going to have him. And then, he scores a lot of points in 2 weeks, and suddenly he's like, absolutely, everyone has to have him. Rip up your wildcard teams, have him in. Well, not really. I mean, I think the robot had it right. You got him in for the really good fixtures, and he happened to have a great outcome during those fixtures. It doesn't mean that that's going to continue. I think the fixtures are fine. I think he's a fine pick and a fine hold, like he always was. But it's somewhere in the middle for me. I don't think you need to have Trippier personally, like at all. He's a nice pick, but I think if it was like, can I get Morgan Gibbs-White up to someone else? But it would result in me having to drop Trippier to do it. That's the route I would go anyway, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I just thought, it's different for me because I'm not wildcarding, so I've not thought it through to the same extent. But for me, like, Trippier's just a player I want, and it's not just his... it's not just his assists and goals. It's not just his assists plus clean sheet potential. It's just the fact he always nails those 3 bonus if he just gets one of those things. But it's interesting. Do you know if you've run any solves or when you've planned your team? So have you generally gone without Trippier then?
Generally, I go without him. I mean, in the team that I've got without Haaland, that I made quickly, it's got Trent Alexander-Arnold instead. So I could easily get Trippier, obviously because he's cheaper instead that way. But yeah, I felt like Liverpool's games were better basically, and that's why I've gone for it. So. I don't have any problem with it. I just think, like I say, if you're not happy about Morgan Gibbs-White, I think Trippier's one you can look at because, I mean, again, we saw. I don't know if you watched the game last night. Fantastic versus PSG, but I do think it's only a matter of time before it does start to take the toll on them, having to do that over and over and over and use that amount of time and energy. And they've got the fixtures aren't quite as good as the last 2. I don't think he's a bad pick. Like, I don't want people to miss me. I think he's great. It's just I think you can justify it.
When you say it takes a toll, do you mean in terms of performances, or do you think there's a chance Trippier would be rotated as well?
I mean, I said that before. I think there's a chance. I don't think it's like something we should worry about, but I just think that that could happen. But I think more just in terms of the level of the team and the performance. They're getting injuries all over. Isak and Wilson keep picking up knocks. They're a good team. I'm scraping the barrel trying to say that he's not, but Botman's missing. He's a really good player. Yes, Lascelles came in and he did well, but how long can that happen? And I know he's back in a couple of weeks maybe, but I just think that you could quite easily go Burn over Trippier, and that 2 million is still a conversation. At the end of the day, yes, he gets the bonus. Yes, he's more likely to get assists. But I mean, you already see, not that that's going to happen every week, but Burns can score goals apparently like every other week as well. So the centre backs are just decent picks. It's a big difference, that 2 million. If you really want to cover the Newcastle defence, which I don't particularly believe in, but if you do want to do that, I think Burns a fine pick at 4.5, 4.6. Like, I don't think the gap there's huge personally.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think it's absolutely fine, and it depends on what else you might afford. Like even with Botman, I think a lot of people have Botman, but again, it's similar to Burn. You're going for Botman over Shaw to save a bit of money. I think Shaw long term has the better goal threat than Botman, and just because Botman's had the better goal threat so far this season, I don't think it suddenly means he's the most attacking of those defenders outside of Trippier. I think it's still Shaw, and I think if money wasn't an option, Shaw's their second best defender as well. Although there's maybe more chance of him being rotated potentially. But I guess on the subject of defenders, and because you've just mentioned him, Trent Alexander-Arnold there, I've not actually seen him in any wildcard drafts apart from Andy Martin's, and now yours, Luke, as you mentioned. What company is he in?
I'll take him out instantly then. I didn't know
that. No, that's... Yes, so yeah, sorry, I'll read out the question for those listening. So this is from Luke7_FPL. Other than Salah, who do you think is the best Liverpool asset on wildcard? Darwin has the best data, but is a minutes risk. Diaz has good data, and has better minutes, but other midfielders are potentially better. Trent maybe a dark horse if we start keeping clean sheets. Good team, defensive data. In terms of Trent, if you have the money for Trent, like why wouldn't you just use that money to have a stronger midfield, for example, or to just have Trippier and upgrade elsewhere?
Yeah, I know. I get it. I mean, the Trent thing as well. He's only just back from injury, isn't he? Is he playing tonight? I'm not sure.
He is. Yeah, he played. Yeah, he's starting tonight. Yeah.
Okay. We have seen it in the past when Trent's come back. They haven't sometimes completely just rushed him and he started every game. So I suppose there's still an element of doubt of how fit he is. Like maybe he plays tonight and maybe he gets.
Yeah.
Even though it's Everton, Klopp's been open to rotating versus Everton a lot in the past. This happens quite often for some reason. So yeah, his minutes may be the teeniest bit of concern just around that, but it's really just a fixtures play with Trent. I think that you, just like Trippier, like I just mentioned, he was seen as a bad pick. The games weren't great, and then as soon as the good game started, he started being great. And Trent is basically the equivalent of Trippier, isn't he? People might say that Newcastle's defence is better, and I'm open to say, yeah, probably is. But I think the fixtures is that good for Liverpool for such a sustained period, it can make up for it. And I've got the extra money, so why not? So I do really like Trent. I don't think he's by any means definitely needed or anything. Between Diaz and Darwin, I like both of them. I think they're really good as well. The issue with them, as everyone keeps saying, and I agree, is the international games like that they've got just before the early kickoff versus Everton in game week 9, I think it is. And then again in game week 13. I think it's game week 13. In 13, I think they play City afterwards, so I'm not too worried about that because they'll probably remove them anyway. But that game week 9 game makes it quite hard to go for them because that's a good game that you'd want them to play. I think it's home to Forest, if I remember rightly. I looked that much, but
game week 9. Let me quickly check for you. Game week 9, Everton at home. Yeah,
Everton at home. Sorry.
Yeah, that's the week where I think if according to review, Salah's always been the best captain there, but something's changed recently in the numbers, and now it just about prefers Haaland against Brighton.
See, I prefer Haaland in that game. Like if I had Haaland, 100% he'd be my captain home with Brighton, and that's a scary one for me. But it's the fact that Darwin and Diaz are both going to be playing probably in internationals. We know in the past Klopp has rotated after the internationals, just before early kickoffs in particular. So I think there's a very big risk around their minutes versus Everton. So that's the only concern. But outside of that game, if you can cover that game somehow, or one of them probably plays because there's just the options and the injuries they've got at the moment with Gakpo. But as to which one it is, I couldn't tell you. But if you've got you're open to benching and you still think that you can cover that well, then I think they're both good picks. To be honest, I would edge more towards Darwin than Diaz, just simply because first of all his numbers are just ridiculous if you can get the minutes right. So if you get lucky on the minutes, potentially you get very lucky in general. And also the fact that Diaz is just a midfielder, right? And midfielders, there's just more options. In strikers, there's probably less. So,
yeah.
But that's my preference. I don't know if you've got a preference. I mean, I know you love Darwin as well, so I guess.
I had Darwin for 2 long last season. I really like them both. I just think the issue is the alternatives are just far safer in terms of minutes. I just hate having to use transfers. and regretting moves and having to do that. So I would just go with safer options, to be honest. And I think it's potentially an option for anyone who's like wildcarding in 10, for example, if they need someone for a 1 week punt next week. I think that's where it's potentially an option. Another thing that makes it viable is, I think Liverpool and Everton play at 12:30. So there's more chance there'll be a leak, for example, for that game, and you might just know for certain Darwin's starting against Everton, and you might just bring him in for that one game wildcard in 10. So I think that's the position where I would potentially consider it. But it's an amazing run: Everton, Forest, Luton, then Brentford, before they play Man City, and after the Brighton game. And I mean, the Brighton game is probably a really good fixture based on how they've played tonight, apparently, and just in general, like they concede a lot of chances, and they have done so far this season. And even like Estupiñán's out now as well, so I think I think that fixture is absolutely fine as well. If I was
after that as well.
Yeah, if I was wildcarding, I wouldn't own either of those two players, I don't think. But yeah, I've thought about it, like particularly for that move that I'll probably make in 9 or 10 that involves removing Haaland. The three players I have in mind are Alvarez, Solanke, or Nunes. So I have to. But it depends how brave I'm feeling, because I think in terms of upside, Nunes 100% has the highest upside, because if he does play 90 minutes or even does start regularly, and you manage to predict that for those three fixtures, Everton, Forest, Luton, like you would 100% have him out of those three players. But even just getting benched in one of them is a huge deal.
Yeah, he's even carrying a knock himself, isn't he, as Klopp said. Yeah. So I know he's starting again tonight, but there's something they're kind of managing. So it's definitely risky, but
it's kind of like I guess finding out that he had a knock and that's why he didn't start the last game in a way is a good thing, though. The fact that kind of implies that he otherwise would have started. And it's very much like last season, he did very much just lose his place. It was as simple as that. There was the end of the season, the last 10 games or so, he just didn't start. And he very much just, I think it was the defensive part of his game in terms of pressing. He just didn't really understand Klopp's system. And like Klopp's commented on that. But then this season so far, Klopp in press conferences has spoken about how great his work is off the ball, specifically kind of pointed that out a number of times. So that makes me think that he'll keep his place.
I spoke to Ping Green as well, who came 700th last year, in case you didn't know out there.
I didn't know that.
No? Okay. He's a big Liverpool fan, and he was basically saying he thinks Diaz and Darwin are, in his words, nailed. But outside of the facts of the international window, and when they come back, he did say that week's a big risk. But what he's saying is Gakpo and Jota are very much going to be for Europe, and those two are for the Premier League. That's his opinion. He does those predictions and stuff. It may not end up being like that, but it gives me a bit of confidence that he's at least in his preferred pick at the moment. It's the minutes thing with Darwin still. It's the fact that he can go off. I think with the Jota injuries, you can almost punt that maybe the Jota injury lasts a bit longer than they're saying as well. That gives you that little extra bit of confidence. The other bit I like about it is the fact that, again, if you can handle that game week 9, like for me, I've got a plan with Darwin where I've got Dan Burn in my team, who I don't play that often, but in that week, Newcastle are home to Palace without Eze as well. So you probably think Newcastle have odds on for a clean sheet there. Maybe if you're happy to bench Darwin, if you get a leak, he doesn't play, you can just play Dan Burn, and I'll be happy with that week, and then I can carry him. So I think that's like a decent option. And the other thing is the fact that you can downgrade him to the likes of Solanke and Alvarez, I think, afterwards. You can kind of take that high-risk punt now where the other options are injured and then sort of see what happens and see when they're coming back. And if he is an issue, then there's kind of safer options you can go down to. Yeah,
it's that thing, isn't it? It's harder to go up to a player if you do it the other way around. Daniel Banks in the chat is just mentioning, what did he say? Or could Trent and Diaz or Darwin cover Salah? I would just say to that is thinking about players from the same team covering other players is probably not the way to think about it. You're ultimately comparing Trent to other defensive players and looking what else you could do with that money. I wouldn't compare it to Salah's points. I would compare Salah to other players at his price point or within midfield. But yeah, like they ultimately Salah as well. They'll probably do well also. You'd think, but yeah, Salah's miles ahead of them, and I would 100% prioritise him if you're wildcarding, as we've already mentioned. There's a couple of other questions there as well, but we'll answer questions as they come up if they're relating to what we're discussing. If not, we'll just answer them when we get to the end of this question period. We'll just come back to them.
I like James Smith's comment.
No Haaland, Big Willie Club. Let's go. Yep. Let's go. Next question. Luke's take on Solanke versus Alvarez on wildcard. This is one of the Analytics FC conundrums on a non-Haaland wildcard, assuming Luke doesn't have Haaland in his wildcard. So basically Solanke or Alvarez. Which one do you have in your team at the moment? Or do you have them both? Or
Daniel Banks in the comments just said Salah and Darwin off at half time, by the way. So that's pretty good as well. I hope that's not injury related, but if not, looks good for a start versus Brian. But I think it's a no-brainer they were going to start anyway that game. Interesting my take on that. Okay, I haven't decided on this one at all. Most of the drafts I've done have not had Alvarez in, just simply because the fixtures again aren't that great. But I'm actually really, really scared to lose him because I just think he's an absolutely fantastic pick. And I just think that value is pretty crazy. I know he's overperformed. Like, I don't think that's in question, but it's just the whole thing that he's so cheap. He's on all those set pieces, he's on penalties. I think the added thing, again, we haven't seen about, he plays in Haaland's position. If Haaland doesn't play or if Haaland subs off, and that may start to happen now the games come thick and fast, or Haaland could just get injured as well, and suddenly Alvarez becomes like, even with those games, arguably the very best pick in the game straight away. So for me particularly as well, I bought him at 6.5, which is his starting price. So I lose money. Obviously I gain it on the sell price, but it's going to cost me more to get back. And if he does end up being one of the best picks in FPL for the entire season, I don't particularly like this mechanic on a side note, but it kind of encourages me to try and keep him because then I own him cheaper than everyone else. Which I don't like because, like I say, I want to play the fixtures and stuff and actually manage my team rather than have that dictated to me. But I'm really struggling. I think Solanke's fine because the games are really good. He's cheap. Like, the rotations work out better as well. I think quite often when I had Alvarez in my team instead of him, I was benching Alvarez a lot. So it almost felt like I'm just keeping him because I really like him more than I'm actually going to use him. I've not decided. I think the sensible play is Solanke. But there's something about Alvarez that just makes me not want to get rid of him. Like, I don't know.
Solanke is just that, like, security, isn't it? He's going to play every game. He's on penalties. In terms of Bournemouth's fixtures, let's have a quick look. Yeah, the next three are good. Everton, Wolves, then Burnley as well. I can definitely see why people would go for Solanke. He
also helps. I mean, that money, there is quite a difference in money, I think, isn't there? If I remember rightly.
Yeah, I think so.
For now there is anyway. And that helps with the rest of your team as well. So
because I've not owned Alvarez, so if I was wildcarding this week, I think I'd be more to have Solanke, but it's probably that reason because Alvarez is that little bit more. And if I have Solanke, that might be allow me someone else.
This probably isn't the right take, but also the fact that it just feels a lot easier to bench Solanke. Like, I'm happy to have Solanke first on my bench, and if he goes mad, I wouldn't even particularly bother me. Whereas benching Alvarez is hard to do. You're benching like a Man City starter in any game, and it just feels wrong. And maybe anyone who has Alvarez wouldn't be looking to do that, but the way my team's set up, he would potentially be on the bench some weeks, and it's scary. Just another question.
Well, two other things in the chat. Daniel Banks, Diaz Porton. I love Daniel Banks. He's like our own Jeff Stelling in the chat, just updating us on all the live games. What a guy. Stefan says, would you have one of them with Watkins? Yeah, is Watkins just an absolute no-brainer for you then, Luke? If going without Haaland.
If you're going without Haaland, he's a no-brainer. I think just because the other picks, Darwin, Alvarez, are great. Solanke, but he's probably he's got that combination of being safe as well as being a good pick, and the fixtures are good. Like, he's got everything there really. The only annoying thing is he's lost penalties. I prefer him to have them, even though he's not particularly good at them. So, I think he's a no-brainer there. I think if you do have a Haaland team, though, it's obviously quite hard to get up to the 8 million. And then that's where I don't think he necessarily is a no-brainer. In fact, it's quite hard to fit him in, I think.
Yep. Great. Sorry, that question was from FPL Gato. This one's from Ryan Cameron at Flair Player. Is there any logic to certain players struggling against a low block, or is it a lazy narrative? Do you want to share your thoughts first? Or do you want me to?
I mean, that kind of sprung on me. I didn't know these questions are coming. I think it's almost certainly just a lazy narrative, to be honest. I don't really think it's much of a factor. I think we remember the times when they fight. They go up and come against a team who, like for example, Spurs versus Sheffield United the other day. They put in a low block. It was hard for them to beat them, and that sticks in your mind that that's a thing that would happen. If you looked at the goal averages scored by Spurs against different opponents, the weaker the opponent, that they score more goals. I'm very, very confident over a long, long period. So I don't think there's much in it. There's also that, like, game state of football is very important, but you don't know what the game state's ever going to be. No one can sit here and say for sure how that game will go. Like, they could have scored a goal versus Sheffield United in the first 5 minutes, and if that happens, the game could be totally different, straight away. There's also the side where you could say, okay, the game's more open, they're not playing a low block. So let's say they start the game open, Man City score, or let's just say it's Man City versus whoever. They score 1-2 goals straight away, go 2-0 up. They then, as people will say all the time, that team then coasts and doesn't try to win the game. So you almost, by being very open and getting your goals early, you can force yourself into a situation where it's almost like no one wants to even try and win the game or score goals, according to FPL Twitter and other places and stuff. So you're almost putting yourself into the equivalent of a low block by being open in the first part of the game. Like, to me, it's all just kind of a nonsense. You can't control what's going to go on in the game. The bookies' odds are there for a reason. Spurs are heavily favourite to beat Sheffield United because they're a better team. So,
yeah, I would just say that, like, it isn't necessarily a lazy argument. It just often is. Like, ultimately, teams play a low block for a reason, to try and reduce the amount of goals. But generally, we know that worse teams will do that against the better teams anyway. They'll try and do that, and it's generally used lazily, and to really. People have very extreme opinions on it, and will say things like, "Oh, I think Sheffield United is actually a harder fixture for Son than Liverpool is," and they'll use the last two games as a way of proving that because it was a low block. But no, ultimately, there's way more chance that Son scores against Sheffield United than Liverpool. So I think it normally, and quite often on FPL Twitter at least, is a lazy argument, but it's not necessarily one. And it's true. It's like the cliche of when people say, "Oh, it's harder to play against 10 men." And obviously that's not true. Like, it's easier to play against 10 men, but it's just that sometimes when you play against 10 men, it changes the game state and they just sit with everyone in, and therefore you remember those times where the teams just struggle to score. So ultimately you're more likely to score against a team with 10 men.
And also, if you play a team that is come out and trying to attack and take the lead and do well, sometimes that team actually does pretty good at that, and then you just end up losing to that team 2 or 3-0 or something like that can happen too. We saw it with Aston Villa, I think, and Brighton, for example. I know they've ended up being very open and conceding a lot, but it was a surprise at the time. I don't think it's a lazy narrative when it comes to players. Like, at the end of the day, managers and real football, you almost have to separate it out, because in real football, the manager will say, okay, this player's probably better versus a low block. There's a lot of space just outside the penalty area, and you want your David Silva types and people who are intricate and they can move in and out, and they might perform well in those games. You hear Pep Guardiola talking about it all the time. And then you have certain players where, when it's a transition game, the game's going to be stretched. They're better at runners. Like, tactically, they're more useful in that game. Yes, but I don't think that necessarily then translates to FPL points with that player. No, that's the difference.
That's different. Yeah, us kind of actually knowing that and being confident enough of that, and then it actually making it being enough different for it to actually impact an FPL decision is a different thing. It's like when we talk about confidence, isn't it? Like, player confidence is definitely a thing, and players definitely play better when they're more confident, for example. But for us to predict how much that impacts players, or the extent to which that makes a difference, isn't enough to influence FPL
and when
decisions.
It can change as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, good question as well. Quick question on West Ham, which is an interesting one, because actually their fixtures overall are really good over this next period. Just their these immediate two aren't, which I guess is why there's not many West Ham players in wildcards. But this is from Stefan, who says, "Why do you think Bowen isn't popular with models? The fixtures don't seem that bad over the next 8 to 12 game weeks."
Yeah, this one was a bit of a surprise to me. Not the question, because like I say, I'm on wildcard and I was looking at Bowen and if I want him and whether I don't. And then I listened to some content as well, and I saw everyone was saying, like, you got to have Bowen, and then he wasn't appearing in solves. I always had Bowen in from game week 10, I think I was looking at, and I didn't really like his first two fixtures, and I think that's probably a big part of it. We discussed just before as well. Isn't it Villa and I can't remember who else it is, Newcastle, which everyone says like the best defence going, and everyone wants all their players, and you can understand why. So I think those two games are pretty tough for him, to be honest. I do think it's probably a little bit more down on Bowen than I would be. Like, I think he is a good option, but ultimately he doesn't take any well, not that I've seen, doesn't really take any set pieces. He has done in the past, but maybe I'm wrong
corners,
there. But
he used to take some corners, but then I think that's just reduced since Ward-Prowse has joined.
Yeah, with Ward-Prowse and that number, he doesn't have penalties anymore, which he did have at one point. It's more just playing that striker role. I looked at the team data as well in terms of the team attack, which shouldn't really be about that with the individual player. But West Ham are poor really overall, and so far this season, from what you might expect. They're mid-table basically. Man United attacks better on paper. Everton's attacks better on paper. Chelsea's attack. Teams that you wouldn't necessarily think. So, yeah, I haven't looked at him as an individual, and maybe his data's fine and great. And like I say, I probably will have him from 10, but I don't think he's a pick that you have to have from 8. I don't really like him for 8. Like, he could do fine, but I don't think you need him for 8 or 9.
Yeah, for those who still have Bruno and Rashford, you might see a lot switch in 10 when they play Man City. But yeah, because after that they've got Fulham, Luton and Everton, though United. But some people will still make the switch there, maybe. And it's just similar to what I mentioned before about Diaz. A lot of it's just to do with alternatives as well. Whereas immediately, if you're on wildcard, Maddison and Son have an incredible next fixture and fixture run. You're going to have Salah in there as well. Probably Bruno because of the fixtures. You might still have an Arsenal player. Might have Mbeumo. There's just lots of options within there, I guess. It's to do with decay as well, isn't it? Ultimately, there is more. His fixtures might be great over the next 8 and 12, but those first 2 are more important than the 8th or the 12th fixture in terms of we don't know.
The EV's more secure and more predictable for the earlier fixtures and the later ones. Yeah,
so that's a big part of it as well. There's less chance he's going to be fit for 8 and 12. We just don't know that with any player.
Having said all that, I may end up starting with him on wildcard, by the way, just simply because some of the other options have now depleted and it saves a transfer for me to get him in 10. So I still may be open to getting him. But yeah, I just don't think he's necessarily needed right now.
Great question from Emma at Jump the Wave. Shout out to Emma for all her work with predicting lineups. She says, can you share your thoughts on optimal goalkeeper pairs? A discussion of bargain picks for those of us with tragic team value. I guess this will help Sam in game week 19 as well. Then only a 14-player team may be the only affordable option. Thanks, Emma. Big boost of confidence. So in terms of keepers on wildcard, what is the kind of template there actually in terms of those wildcarding, Luke?
I genuinely don't know because I haven't been looking at anyone else's team for that. Areola wasn't template actually when I did it on review. At least he didn't come up, which really surprised me. I think I had all sorts of different goalkeepers appear. I think Leno still appeared, which I was quite surprised about. I think Turner's obviously still there just because he's cheap. How long he ends up staying in goal is debatable. So I don't know. For me, Areola is just clear. Like, I don't know why you'd even avoid that at this point. The game's not great initially, but obviously after a while are very good. And he's just so cheap. I mean, we're happy to pick poor keepers at 4 million and he's 4.2 in a good team. So Areola is just absolutely clear. I'm more than happy to say go Turner or go even like a 3.9 not player and just play him if you can use the money. Like, that's something I've looked at as well. I don't think that's I know a lot of the analytics crowd like to have rotatable keepers and another option in case someone get injured. I get the benefits of it. More often than not, I just end up getting it wrong when I rotate goalkeepers. I mean, just look at Pickford Turner again. It's just tragic every time I even try and do it. So I just think just taking that decision out of my hands and just having Areola is like, it feels like a benefit. I think everyone will be on him as well. So if you are one of those people who cares about effective ownership and how the game week goes, like literally all you're going to see is people cheering on Areola and that's it. I would have thought so. Go on.
I would just say you just will have rotating goalkeepers though. Like, you're going to have 2 playing goalkeepers. You're going to have Areola.
I don't know. I might have Virginia.
Oh really? Yeah.
Because Turner's 4, and if I think he loses his spot, and I need the 0.1, then I may just stick in someone random, but that, maybe not. I haven't actually got that though. I've got Raya and Areola. Yeah. So despite me saying all of that at the moment, that is a rotatable goalkeeper pairing where quite often, because the rotation isn't actually great in terms of like the fixtures, like on the day where Raya's got a good game, Areola's got a good game as well. So I already know Areola's getting 13 points and Raya's conceding and I'm going to be absolutely raging. But I just feel like Raya and Arsenal's game, like at that price and their games and stuff, I really like him. And the fact that most people won't have him, there is a slight worry that maybe he just like loses his place as well. So I think some people just won't pick him based on that. And that could be the case. So it is a bit of a risk.
Yeah, I honestly wouldn't be. I just think it's really clear that he's signed him as his number one, essentially. Yeah, definitely. He's just. I think a lot of it's to do with just how good he is with his feet, and the fact he's been playing him in. He played in midweek, didn't he? Again in the Champions League.
Yeah, he made a bit of an error with his feet there, though. That's what people are saying.
Sure, I just don't think Arteta will be swayed by that. And I mean, and particularly if you've got Areola as well, I think if Ramsdale comes in, it'll only be for like a one-off game for whatever reason. I just can't see that switching. I think Raya's just a significantly better keeper, in my opinion.
Right.
And the only worry is that Arteta mentioned in a press conference that he regrets not subbing his keeper mid-game. But yeah. I don't know if it's the kind of thing they just say tongue-in-cheek or whether they'd actually do it in reality. I don't think
he is
so.
a lunatic, to be fair, but no, he probably won't do it. I mean, if he lost his place and I had to rely on Areola, it's not really a problem. It's just the inconvenience of having to then sort that situation out. And obviously blocking yourself out of a third Arsenal spot is quite an important position, right? It'd have to be something I address pretty quickly. So I kind of like just having Raya and Areola from now for a while, but to change him to Flecken for the double game week, probably. Change Raya to Flecken when that happens. Is it 19? I can't remember which week it is now, but something like that. And on that note as well, I think that's the other one I like is Flecken. I think if you just have him here now, the rotation is actually pretty good with Areola if you want to do it. If you don't want to do it and you just want to leave him on his bench, that's fine as well and just play Areola. But then you've kind of got him in place for that double because it will come around pretty quickly. And it's almost saving a transfer down the line. And
it's just, if you're doing things on review, you can go up to 12 game weeks. That game week 20 potential doubles just beyond that at the moment. So I think in 9 and 10 wildcards, you might see him more just because that potential double game week is included within it and people want to save a transfer there. Or not necessarily save a transfer, just get that extra EV potentially for having a doubler, even though the second game is against City. But yeah, he blanks in 18, so you'll need to have Areola. He'll need to be ready to play then. He plays Man United then. The other thing is that Ray is not allowed to play against Brentford, I believe, in game week 13.
Okay, who do West Ham play in 13? I didn't know that. But
it's fine. Yeah, they play Burnley.
I
noticed that because I looked on again. I was looking on review and suddenly saw how low down Ray was, and I was confused. Yeah, and then he has 0 X-Mins in that one-off game against Brentford.
Makes sense.
So that's obviously just part of his contract when they signed him. He's a permanent signing, wasn't he? He wasn't a loan or anything, was it? So it must have been in the contract that this season he can't play them or something.
I suppose the appeal here for the Raya thing is just the fact that he's shown signs already where he's able to get bonus points, like even for Arsenal, and we know for Brentford last season he was ridiculous. So it's just that kind of upside thing that we think, well, Raya potentially could be the best goalkeeper in the game. We don't know that for sure, but there's a chance of it. So am I willing to risk it when I've got the backup of Areola? That's kind of the way I'm looking at it. I think, well, maybe I am, because that's the kind of manager I am. So I'll probably do it. It may end in tears and Areola scores more points than Raya, and I have to sort it out maybe even later. But to me, it probably feels like it might be worth it. So I might go for it. But I've also seen Johnston. People say Johnston because it rotates quite well with them to begin with. So I think there's a number of options, and really, I think all of them are pretty good. And goalkeepers are so hard to predict anyway that I would just say that you sort the rest of your team out, and then whatever you're left with at the end, you just go with whatever options available. I'd put the least effort into it because, or maybe it's just me, I can't pick a goalkeeper for love nor money. So just ignore everything I've said.
And Raya is on loan, by the way. It's like a loan.
Yeah, I knew he was on loan. He didn't twig until you suddenly said he can't play Brentford. So of course that makes sense.
Yeah, I didn't actually realise he was on loan. Don't think.
Yeah, it was the dodgiest deal of the century, mate. I don't know how that happened, but they announced it was a loan. I was like, what? Yeah.
Probably one of those where it's a loan but to buy, but it's 100% to buy, isn't it? Yeah, and they're getting around some kind of loophole or something. Great. This is from FPL Double Bogey. Sam has Saka. I think, what's your plans if out and late wildcard? Regarding him in 10, are you selling then reversing? I guess that's mentioned because of his fixtures. I think he plays Sheffield United in 10. Yeah, he does. I've actually already sold Saka. I sold him really early in the week for Son because I was pretty certain I was going to do that move. And it was a bit risky with Son's fitness, but it seems like Son's okay now and Saka's potentially injured, so I've got away with it, I think. But my plan, is potentially to just go without him for that Sheffield United fixture, so I won't be bringing him back in straight away because after Sheffield United, he's got Newcastle, and to invest in Arsenal players again from game week 12. That's my plan at the moment, which allows me to roll the transfer in 10. Potentially use one in 11 and one in 12. That's my plan at the moment. But I think Saka, is like fine to keep hold of if you have him, because he's been called up to the England team, hasn't he? So I think if you've got him and you don't have the transfer to move him out either, I think you can just start him this week. It just, yeah. The fact they're playing City, I just think there's and just Arteta's history of just blatantly lying in press conferences. My guess would be that he just starts, but who knows? I'm just thinking about it now though. I wonder if the fact it's City, with these types of injuries, we often say, oh, he'll either play 0 minutes or 90, when it's like a case of risking. But the fact it's Man City, that does make me think, if it's a bit risky, is that the kind of game where actually if he is benched, he's going to come on if they're drawing, and he's just going to risk it a bit more because of the importance of the fixture. Yeah, maybe, it's worth considering, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose it is. I mean, you don't really want to be playing him versus City if you can help it anyway, do you? Yeah. But I mean, he's fine. I think he still is the first person on penalties if they were to get one in the game like that. But yeah, I think he's fine. I mean, I sold him simply because he was going down on value, and then I can bring him back in 10 or 12, like you say. That's the plan, and avoid the fixtures. But would I be surprised at all if Saka just continues to score points and be fine? Like, I don't think he's an urgent sell. Like, there's probably lots of other problems in everyone's team at the moment, given the amount of flags that are floating about. So I think he's probably like low down on the priority list to sell. If your situation where like the only opportunity to get to Son and that he's got great games and he's a captain option, like I think I would have done that as well. So you probably have either already done it like Sam, or now it's kind of like you just keep him, to be honest.
Yeah. I think it's to do with the alternatives, isn't it? If you've not got Son, or if you've not got either Son or Maddison, that's where. But if you've got both of those, that's where it's really viable to just keep him, to be honest. And he's then got Chelsea, then Sheffield United. So yeah, it's a very team dependent one, isn't it? Let's move on from questions. I'm glad we did it in this order, just because I think we've covered loads of what we would discuss now anyway. But we can just quickly run through. We've basically got an optimal wildcard team. This is just based on, I use the word optimal there very loosely. We've got a wildcard team based on FPL review and a solve that I've run. So we'll just have a quick look at that and discuss it. So we've asked FPL review for permission to share this, just so everyone's aware of that as well. This team here is based on 12 weeks, 0.85 decay, heavy solve, normal free transfer value, etc. So a pretty like standard settings, and just selecting the top line. And for those listening, it's a team with Raya, Trippier, Burn, Salah, Son, Fernandes, Mbeumo, Maddison, Dalot, Alvarez, Watkins, then a bench of Areola, Cash, Archer, and Zinchenko. You might want to open this on YouTube just so you can see it, Luke. It's lower quality on our screen.
Yeah, I've done that,
So this is kind of their idea of an optimal team. So double Newcastle defence with Dalot in the starting 11. Captain Salah this week with Son Vice. I've talked through that already, Luke. So I guess the kind of obvious question is, how different is this to the team that you're potentially going with, and what are the things that would stop you just going with this team?
Yeah, I mean, it looks a lot like that, to be honest. It's for my team at the moment, the defence is probably the biggest difference, I would say. It's got Raya in, I just noticed. Okay, that makes me feel a little bit better. I didn't quite surprised at that. I thought it was being off key. I think the midfield's pretty similar. I mean, in my team, I also have Bruno Fernandes, like for 2 weeks. That ends up going to Saka, probably, or Bowen. I just think those games are too good. I know Man United have been awful, but we've kind of been robbed of a few options as well, with the likes of Eze and potentially Diaby and other people. So, when you're looking for a midfielder for 2 weeks, I'd love it to be a Liverpool midfielder. I'd love that to be Diaz, but we just discussed the fact that he might not play the second game, or the minutes are a bit riskier. So Bruno Fernandes, the one thing he does bring is that those 92 minutes there, like, you just could be so happy and secure that he's going to turn up and play. So he's been a massive letdown. I've had him in my team the entire time. I've wildcard and he's still in my team. Surely he just plays back the favour. But yeah, I'm gonna keep him. So that's pretty much the same. In Mbeumo, I've got rid of. Like, I think the fixtures are okay, but I think with him, everyone knows he's kind of playing a little bit of a different position at the moment. Brentford don't look quite the same, and there's other options. So maybe that's just going shiny toy and going somewhere else. But I think he's fine. Like, I would be happy to keep picking him. We're scrambling around for options as a result of like Eze's injury and that, and he does do a job there. So I don't begrudge that. I just want to look elsewhere now. So that's what I'm going to try and do. The biggest issue I got with that team really is, again, the double defence for Newcastle. I'm not 100% sure on that moving forward. And the fact that Dallow's in there, which I know is a review darling, and I totally get it, but I just think Man United are so bad. I don't know whether I can bring myself to do it. He's also like, if he was 4.5, I'd be more happy to do it. He's like 5 million, I think, or no, 4.9 is right on the screen.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I want to pay that much for him. I just think Udogie and Porro are better options, at least in the immediacy as well.
Yeah. I think with Dallo, a lot of it's to do with the fact he's just completely nailed for the next couple of months while they have injuries. And he does tend to play 90 minutes and he puts in a lot of crosses. He's a bonus. Because of that, he gets a lot of bonus points. So yeah, I like him for that reason. And because I'm a sheep that just follows review. I've already got him on my team.
Have you already got him?
Yeah,
I just don't have any faith for the clean sheet,
ago.
but I suppose you can apply that to so many teams, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, someone in the chat saying Zinchenko over Gabriel seems strange. I wonder if that's a price thing. One thing I will add to this is just based on kind of inputting my team into review. It's just running it with one set of settings. It's based on my team value. So when I said the word optimal before, that depends. Like I would recommend anyone on wildcard to run solves with different game week thresholds, with different free transfer values. Try it out with different settings, and try and work out what the common themes are you see. Lock in players if you're absolutely set on them, and make predetermined moves, for example. So it's not as simple as just running a solve like this at all. This just gives us a general idea of the kind of players you want to be considering, and just and again, it also just shows you that in a standard optimal team there's no Haaland, which is just really interesting and good for the game as well. And someone mentioned as well that Archer's still wearing his Villa kit there, which is very true.
He is, yeah.
Yeah, and he's an interesting one actually, Archer. He's just it's just really nice that there's a player that's 4.5 that will play.
Yeah, he's actually quite difficult because if you want to go, like there's teams I've looked at, like I say, where you go Solanke or Darwin alongside Alvarez and Watkins, and you go for a front three, and you can still have a good midfield as well, and it just becomes a rotatable option where you bench one of Alvarez or Solanke. Let's have like a really strong team. This is with no Haaland, obviously, so you've got so much money. And I think part of the negative, strangely, is the fact that you end up losing Archer. I know you can always go back to him, but it's like, well, Archer's just such a default easy pick, isn't he? And he just enables a lot. So when you go back to Haaland eventually, which I think is probably 16 when he plays Luton, that's probably the time I would look to bring Haaland back in. Having Archer there is an easy way to do that, and sort of messing around using transfers on 4.5 million strikers doesn't sound ideal. So yeah, he is part of that problem, I guess. But
I think that's actually. I don't think we really know who's on penalties of Sheffield United, and it could be Archer.
I think it probably is, but I don't know that for sure. No.
He's the kind of pick where, if, for example, he's playing Fulham this week, if he scores and then they get a penalty and suddenly he braces, like he's the kind of player that will. Yeah, he's a great player as it is, to be honest, and particularly.
He feels like a mini Solanke. He's like a mini Solanke, isn't he?
He's great. Yeah, he's a really, really, really good player. So yeah, he's not just like a standard 4.5. He just happens to play minutes. He's genuinely the kind of player who can. Score goals or maybe even brace in a really good fixture. That can happen as well.
I would say that. Sorry, mate. I was just going to say that the longer Sheffield United go without scoring goals and not doing whatever, I think there is like a chance, like we've seen other managers do recently, like they change it up and maybe Archer comes out. I know that he's probably a step above and they don't have a lot of options, but ultimately the job of the manager is to try and change things sometimes to make it work. So. Yeah, I hope Archer continues to play and continues to, score some goals and stuff and keep himself in the team. But I don't think it's out of the realms of possibility that eventually Archer might come out of the team just to try it different. I think one of the criticisms pointed at Archer is that he's kind of that player that doesn't particularly help the team overall. He's just like a very lethal finisher, isn't he? And like for a team like Sheffield United, you almost kind of need players to be chipping in as much as they can. I don't know if that's a fair criticism. It's just what I've read. But
yeah. I guess the question that a lot of people have is Fernandes is in there. Like a lot of people will just be thinking, United are rubbish. Why do you have Bruno Fernandes?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing because that makes me want to keep him. And then, I hope people do sell him because he is just a fantastic pick, I think, overall. And
after the City game,
as a Man United have been.
Just after the City game, the fixtures are unbelievable as well. And it's just like, I know people say like they're awful, they're immediate sells, but they're not going to. Then like Rashford and Fernandes, they're not going to not score for the rest of the season. It's going to turn around at some point, and it could be against Brentford and Sheffield United, and then suddenly everyone will want them for that run of Fulham, Luton, Everton, and So I think if the wild card does go badly this week for people who play it, I think it'll be Rashford and Fernandes that are the reason, most likely. And yeah, if you, it seems viable to only have one of them, or would you consider having both, or do you think there's an argument for Rashford over Fernandes?
I prefer Fernandes just because I think at the moment the way Rashford's playing, I don't really have any. It doesn't influence me the fact that he's not playing particularly well and he hasn't been doing points. That's not what the consideration is for me. The fact that his minutes seem slightly riskier because he's been getting subbed off the last couple of games because of the way he's been playing and the team's functioning means that therefore he's a slightly worse pick. Like you, I don't have any doubts that he will sort himself out eventually and start scoring, but I don't really want to have him over Fernandes when he might get 70 minutes in a game compared to 95 or whatever.
His underlying data is not that different to last year either. He's just, he's obviously playing badly. But it's more that playing badly might impact his minutes. And I think if he does play regularly still, he'll be a threat.
I think someone in the chat...
Sorry,
go on, carry on, mate.
I was going to say, I think he's had the second most shots or something in the league so far. So he's like right up there. He's still getting chances and shooting regularly. There's like no doubt the team are playing badly, but I just, with the quality of the players they have, they're not gonna. That's not gonna happen forever. And I think with those fixtures, I'd bank on that. Changing soon, that would be where I'd go with it. And Fernandes, it's penalties as well, isn't it? Just as a big thing. It
would be really nice if that finally came to fruition because we have been saying that every single week for a long time.
And even with a quick question on Spurs, is that what you're about to mention from the chat in terms of Richarlison? do you think Richarlison's an option with the injuries they have at the moment? Which is who are the players that are out at the moment? Is it Solomon?
Solomon's out.
Yeah, and Brennan Johnson.
Brennan Johnson's injured, and then Son himself is obviously carrying a bit of a knot where he probably goes off in games. So I get it. He's probably got quite secure minutes at the moment. I do find it funny. I think someone said in the analytics Discord before, Seamus, and it just made me laugh. It was a lot of people started the season with Richarlison. He was playing up front with secure 90 minutes, and people were looking to hit the guy out after 3 weeks. Yeah. And now he's potentially playing left wing. And people are looking to bring him into their teams, and even maybe get him in at the expense of other players. It's funny how these things work in fantasy football. I think he's a fine pick. I think he's okay, but I don't really like it because I just don't think that he performs that well on the left wing overall. And I know they've got injuries at the moment, but they will change. And I think there are other options that you can use. Like I've memed a bit saying, well, maybe you could have Porro right wing and could move. You could have Emerson right back and Kulusevski left wing, but we've seen so far that he has actually changed that left wing position quite a lot in all the games he's played. It doesn't necessarily just mean that Richarlison is definitely now getting it. The alternative is he could move Son there, I guess, and Richarlison back up front and suddenly looks good. But I think he's fine. I just think that structurally it causes you an issue as well, because if you go Richarlison, Son, Maddison, I personally like either Udogie or Porro for like a longer term hold, and I just... I want to keep them there. That's who I've got over Dallo. So I completely get it. If you're like a Dallo dedicatee and you want to have him in your team, then it makes sense in this setup. You could have him over in Bomo here, and that would work fine, I think, if you could make it work money-wise. But for me, I've got the Spurs defender, and I don't want to piss around having to take Richarlison in and out, basically.
Yeah, I get that. In fact, something that's worth mentioning is it just triggered my memory because FPL Optimizer in the chat, which I presume is Sertalp rather than Bass. Because Sertalp started with Richarlison, which is, I think, the reason for his sad face in the chat, reminding me of that.
Right, yeah. He's a good pick. He's a good pick. You're getting validated now.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I think, so on the FPL Optimised on their pod this week, which I think just came out yesterday, I listened to it today with FPL Trout. It was really good, but I
listened to it too. It was great.
Trout was saying he was really sceptical of Richarlison's EV on review because if you move his minutes to the same as Son, he's basically as good as him. So he thinks there's a chance that maybe it's underestimating the certainty that Richarlison will now play on the wing. Maybe that was his kind of general theory on it, because it's really hard to believe that they would be the same EV based on that, or maybe it's overestimating the chances of him being on penalties or something like that. That was just his read of it.
Or just being as good a player as Son. I mean, that's surprising, isn't it?
Yeah. So there has to be something that's kind of causing them to be the same. So maybe it's overestimating one of those things. And these are all the things you need to consider when you're using review. Like you've got to kind of try and judge these things as well and work out what's best in the context of your team, work out risk, etc. I know we repeat it every week, but it's always worth mentioning that you don't just. There's a reason why if you look at analytics teams, they're all so different, and about 30% are probably wildcarding this week, about 30% will wildcard in 10, and about 30% will wildcard in 19 or something. Like you get a split despite a lot of people using the same data and same tools.
Yeah, and Richarlison can go absolutely massive against Luton. Like there's no doubt.
He's sure. Like he could. And the thing is, if he braces and then they suddenly get a penalty, that's exactly what could happen with Spurs. Is one of them could brace, then they get a penalty. The player who's on a hat trick takes it for their hat trick, and we still don't even know who's on penalties because we don't know if that's the reason they took it. That would be absolutely classic.
Or Son could be off the pitch, and Maddison's carrying a knock as well. Like, Richarlison's in. He's in the frame for penalties. He's in and around it. I don't think he's first choice, but he's in and around it. So yeah, it could happen.
Yeah, for sure. Is there anything else you wanted to add to this team? The only other thing I'll show now is I basically, on this next slide, I've got this team next to a team where I force included Haaland. And the only reason I wanted to include that was to just show that this team doesn't include Salah, which is why I don't think this is viable. I also had a quick look at a team where you force include Haaland and Salah, and there's, again, just a lot of things you end up sacrificing, potentially Trippier, potentially Watkins, potentially that fourth or fifth midfielder being worse. I think one of them had like Pau Torres over Cash, that kind of thing. So, but I mean, we've touched all those things earlier in the podcast. I just kind of wanted to show that. So this is what a draft would look like with just Haaland, but it's not to show you that that's viable. It's to show you that when you do force include him, it excludes Salah, which is like really. I just don't think you want to go without Salah personally. This is one of the reasons I'm just so convinced on the fact that if I was wildcarding, I would just lose Haaland personally. It's funny like seeing all that stuff, like being on FPL Twitter, because you've got a load of analytical players who are like, it's like you're the unusual weird one if you don't sell Haaland, and then you've got in FPL Twitter world, it's like people are joking about selling Haaland, and they're like, oh, obviously I would never actually do it, kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm seeing more people coming around to it.
Yeah,
I think
there are more. Yeah,
it's like it merges all the time. I think, like we're getting closer and closer together all the time. I think the team's great. I think that's fine as well. Like I said, I think that's more than viable. And all it takes here. Someone talked about covering Liverpool earlier. Is that when you captain Haaland, he does really well. It doesn't sound like a massive ask, does it? That's all you really need for this to work out pretty damn well and be close. And then you could have your Liverpool players in there if you really wanted to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, you could have Diaz over Rashford or Fernandes or something. Yeah,
if you really wanted to. I mean, it's very easy to see it working. I mean, the team that I built in 10 does have, which I'm not doing anymore because I've already hit the button, but it did have Salah and Haaland and Watkins, and I thought it pretty much covers all those players as well, really. Like, I didn't lose out on anyone. Like, I can actually read it, the team that I've got here, so people would just, if they wanted to look at it themselves. But it's Turner and Areola in goal, so maybe you lose out on the extra goalkeeper, really, because Turner, I'm not sure you can count him, but he's there at least. Cash, Zinchenko, Burn, Porro, so it's pretty much close to everyone's got. And then I've got Bayer, so you sacrifice one defender position for like a 4 million. That could be Lamptey, whoever, just some cheap defender. In the rotations, when I looked, he was last on the bench every single week anyway, and it didn't really matter. But obviously, you can never guarantee that you're not going to need him. The real difference was the midfield, where Son, Maddison, Salah were there, and then I just had Diaby and Ward-Prowse. Now Diaby's got injured since, and Ward-Prowse is cheap, but those two could be cheaper midfielders. They could be Matoma, they could be would have been Eze if he was available. Could have Mboma like you've got there. You've got Neto. You've got other cheap, basically two around the 6 million price in midfield was fine, and then you can have Haaland and Watkins up front. Now, if you wanted to change Watkins to Alvarez or Darwin, then that gives you the money to either put Ward-Prowse or Diaby up. And I think that's more likely what you'll see on FPL Twitter, like in terms of game week 8 card. I think it'll be closer to that, where they have got both of those two, Haaland and Salah, but they have managed to fit those teams in. It's just a little thinner on the bench, basically, but not too much. You've Archer, a cheap midfielder, and then a 4 million defender. I think you'll see that a lot. Yeah,
like it definitely is like. Yeah, well, I would say this team with just Haaland, I don't think that is... Well, it is viable in the sense that it could easily do really well. Of course it could, but we're talking fine margins, and I still just don't... I wouldn't consider just having Haaland personally. I think Salah's too essential during this period. But in terms of Haaland and Salah, like it's 100% is a viable option. Like, you can do it. I don't think it's the right thing to do. I think the right move is to sell Haaland and just have Salah for the majority of teams, no matter how good your team value is. But that could change in a couple of weeks as well. Once Haaland has... Wait, who's Haaland got this week? Arsenal, yeah, so he gets past his worst fixture now, and then maybe from next week you might see a bigger split in kind of wildcard in wildcard 9 drafts. There might be more of a split of people having Salah.
I think it'd be more
Haaland
popular in 10.
Yeah, and again maybe even 10 as well. But yeah, maybe I guess they're quite even, aren't they? The two of them in 9. But that's just how I'd view it. Shall I just have a quick look through the chat for any questions we might have missed before we finish?
Sure.
Was it, unless there's anything else you wanted to particularly mention?
Just say Zinchenko versus Gabriel. I do think that's pretty close.
Yeah.
I suppose the point is, from both of those two players, you could say we don't know for sure that they're both nailed, because Arsenal haven't had all their players fit and available and Partey back and everything. So I don't think you can say it for absolute certain that both of them now. Zinchenko does often get early subs. It's a more stressful position.
Yeah.
Review prefers Zinchenko, and I think I do as well, because in some of the games he is just playing incredibly advanced. I just think from open play he's a more chance of getting bonus as well, maybe getting the odd assist. So it kind of appeals a bit to me. But Gabriel at that price, I mean, if you go back in previous seasons for review, he'd be in every single absolute lock, wouldn't he, all over the place. So maybe it's overthinking to go Zinchenko. I don't know. I think it's very close. I haven't decided which one I'll go from them.
Sure. I think I would go Gabriel. I think if I go for one of those two to save the money. I think there must have been something going on in those first two games, whether it was linked to the news that came out about Gabriel like having an offer or talking to a Saudi team or not, whether it was something else. I don't know. I just felt so weird that for those first 2 or 3 games he was randomly dropped and now he's suddenly starting every week. Don't know. Maybe he was just experimenting. Maybe there isn't. Maybe, yeah. Don't know.
I think it is linked to Zinchenko being injured and Partey then getting injured, but he's performed well since. So does he want to change that up? I still think Zinchenko is the better option to have at left back than Partey is at right back. It just now there's an opportunity where he could spring a surprise or a rotation and switch that inversion round in any random game. Like, that's still a threat that's there. If it happens, I don't think it's going to happen regularly. And that affects both Zinchenko and Gabriel, as we've already said. So it's almost like, okay, what if it affects one? You're going to be fine.
Yeah, cool. There's a few questions in the chat we missed, so I'll read them out, but we'll just do them more quick fire. In fact, FPL Spartans doesn't ask a question, just mentions the fact that you're doing very well in the Sky game, apparently, Luke. So
I always do, don't I? I'm absolute G of Sky. No, cheers. Yeah, cheers, Spartans. Yeah, it's been a decent start in that. I think I'm 300th or something, 310th. But yeah, enjoying that game a little bit more. But I've been absolutely done over by injuries this week, so I shall be dipping down. I've got Eze in my team, Estupiñán in my team. Rodri got suspended. What else happened? Saka got his injury where I don't know if he's going to play. Dunk, I thought was injured, so removed him, and then it turns out he miraculously turned back up. So yeah, it's probably all downhill from here.
Are you playing any other fancy games or just those two?
No, just those two. Yeah. I don't have any time. Well, UCL actually, but that's extremely casually. Literally log in 2 minutes before the game starts and just pick players I like. Yeah,
I've never played that. I think I tweeted a joke about just copying someone's team and seeing how well it does, and then tweeting about the fact you're doing well or just deleting your team after one game week. But
well, that's what I did last season in UCL.
You actually did that, yeah.
Pretty much. I contacted. Oh God, why have I forgotten his name? He's come off of Twitter. That's it, Kaz. Thank you very much. Yeah, I just asked him for his team, and he gave me his team. He ended up tweaking it and picking a different team, and I was like 300th in the world by like the quarterfinals and the semi-finals. Like literally beating everyone somehow by pure luck, and then I missed the deadline, so I don't know how I even finished in the end. But it does work, ladies and gents, to just copy random content or just random people and just get lucky. That's all you need.
Yeah. 100%, great strategy. Any thinking on why there's so many injuries so far? Is this coincidence or volume of football or something else? I can answer that quite quickly. There's not actually, so far this season, in terms of instances of injury in the Premier League, they're not actually higher than they were last season. There's just probably generally quite often the perception that is the case, particularly when they happen to key players or happen to FPL picks. But in general, there is a higher instance over the last few years in general, even over the last decade. And yeah, it's almost entirely down to just players having to play more games. But if the games stay at the same rate, and then as the sports science support improves and teams develop to have bigger squads, that should then reduce over time as well. So yeah, that probably is the main reason. There's probably a number of complex reasons. That's probably the main one, to be honest. But yeah, actually, it's not in terms of the numbers compared to the last season. It's not actually higher at the moment compared to last season. Similar, I think. Yeah, it's just a kind of our perception maybe of it.
Do you think it's also to do with the standard of football was worse? So back then, like players could play more with a knock or didn't really flag it up, and the science wasn't good enough to pick it up, and so they just let people play like half injured essentially, and it didn't make much of a difference. Or is that?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't know. It's more that I just know that it's increased in the last 10 years. I don't know how many records there are actually of injuries before that, in terms of actually being documented. But yeah, it's also like the speed of the game and things like that. Potentially, but yeah, in terms of the top level, that's where you tend to see it, and it's the quantity of games, and you also get young players. You get players who just have their careers killed just by playing way too much when they're young, and then they come through and they just have a career just full of injuries. And what you tend to see more recently, or what you tend to see better coaches and clubs do, is to manage that better with younger players, which is what you've seen, for example, with Foden. They obviously have a big squad, so they're able to do it at City, but he could have played way more when he was younger if they wanted to.
Evan Ferguson.
For example, yeah, Ferguson as well. De Zerbi's clearly doing that. I think teams are more conscious of that now and are more aware of the risks of over playing players when they're younger, and the kind of knock-on health and performance impacts of that, basically.
Everyone sit at home and pray for Saka now.
Yeah. He's getting played whatever, isn't he, at the moment? Is everyone overlooking Almiron again? Is a question. In one word, Luke.
I mentioned him when was the last pod we did? Yeah, I don't know if it was with you. I said Almiron's actually looks pretty good. No, it wasn't with you. It was with Average FPL.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. When I did that, I said Newcastle's attack's great. Their attacking numbers are great, and it's like, well, if you need to pick an attacking player from them, which might actually be a good idea, it's actually quite tough because obviously Wilson and Isak rotate. Who else do you pick? And Almiron just ends up being the default guy at that point. He probably should have been Gordon, but I didn't realise how nailed he'd be with Barnes there and Isak playing left wing. That wasn't one word at all, was it? Almiron, I think, is a fine pick. I think he's fine. The fixtures are now dipping a bit, so I wouldn't have him in. But maybe go back 3 weeks ago, he's a fine pick. It's just the midfield again. It's so hard to find players in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. Any thoughts on Haaland is another question.
Yeah, what do you think on that? I'll throw it back to you because I keep talking, but he is enticing because the fixtures are there for me, at least.
Yeah, I think he's a really good. I think he seems to be a really good player. Now I can't just sit here and claim to know loads about him. The first time I watched him play is since he's played for Man United, and yeah, early signs are that he looks really good. So I think he potentially could be an option in the future, but isn't one right now. In terms of it'd be very risky to get him now with the other options in terms of Watkins, Alvarez, Solanke. But yeah, I don't see any reason why he wouldn't become an option in the future. Seems like a really good player. Yeah, and that's just. I don't have a strong opinion on it because he's not been in the Premier League for a long time.
He hasn't got the greatest goal scoring record, but I think he's a fine pick at that price and for the fixtures they've got. He's fine. It's just you're kind of relying on Man United, and then where are you going afterwards? I guess Solanke to me is just a better pick who's cheaper because he's got the penalties as well, but he's still fine.
Cool. Yeah. I suppose the last question, which summarises the pod well, has tonight helped with your wildcard team? Has it helped you pick your team or make any decisions, Luke?
No, doesn't help at all. I don't know what I'm doing. No, I'm sure it has. But I've always, it's hard to convince me of anything. I'm a stubborn bastard. Even review struggles to twist my mind once I've settled on it. That's probably my biggest weakness, I would say, is I sit down and maybe do a plan and then I almost get wedded to it. And that's part of being a Sky player where I can plan it out for ages and I like the plan and I want to follow through with it. And here I kind of made my game week 10 plan and I almost want to make my wildcard 8 team fit into my game week 10 plan because I don't want to let it go. But I've got a day off tomorrow. So literally tomorrow I'm going to sit down all day and come up with a master plan that's going to work. So we'll see.
Love it. Nice. Great. I think that's us then. Just like we've had loads of people watching live tonight. Yeah, between 80 and 90, which is great. So thanks everyone for listening in. We really appreciate it. We won't be podding next week because it's international break. But we'll be. I think it's me and Ben the week after that. So we'll see you then. I suppose last question: who going to captain, Luke? Salah, if you wildcard, I presume.
Oh, I still don't know.
Either are viable.
Yeah, it's one of those two.
Yeah,
it's one of those two, but I don't know who.
Nice, cool. I'll be captaining Son, I think. But it's one of those, and he plays early, doesn't he? And it's going to be a long wait for that Arsenal-Man City game on Sunday if he blanks. Even more so for you because you won't even own him. Great. Yeah, thanks again everyone for joining. Really appreciate it. And good luck with your game weeks.